A poor old man, sitting quietly in a small diner, notices a hungry little girl with no money for food. Without hesitation, he reaches into his nearly empty pocket and pays for her meal, not realizing how deeply that small act of kindness would change both of their lives forever. Years later, there's a knock on his door. When he opens it, he's stunned. Standing there is the same little girl, now grown, holding a life-changing surprise he could never have imagined. What she reveals leaves the old man speechless and the entire neighborhood in awe. This is not just a story of generosity, but of how kindness always finds its way back when you least expect it. The story begins on a quiet evening in a small town where life moved at its own gentle pace. There was a diner that everyone in the community knew well, not because it was fancy or offered gourmet meals, but because it was simple, cozy, and warm. The kind of place where the smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, and the waitress behind the counter always knew your name. On this particular evening, an older man named Henry sat at his usual spot, the booth in the corner, with his modest meal in front of him. Henry wasn't wealthy. In fact, most would describe him as poor, living on a meager pension that barely covered his rent and bills. But he never complained. He was a quiet man, with kind eyes, and despite having very little, he always carried himself with dignity. As he ate slowly, Henry noticed something out of the corner of his eye. Just a few tables away, a little girl sat alone, nervously looking at the menu in front of her. She couldn't have been more than 9 or 10 years old. Her clothes were a little worn, her hair not freshly combed, and her small hands fidgeted on the table. The waitress came over and spoke to her kindly, but the girl shook her head when asked if she was ready to order. Henry watched quietly, realizing that the child didn't have enough money to eat. She looked hungry, glancing at other customers' plates as meals were being brought out. There was a certain sadness in her eyes that Henry recognized because he had known hunger himself many times in his life. Henry could have looked away. He could have finished his dinner and gone on with his evening, but something inside him wouldn't let that happen. After a moment of thought, he called the waitress over. In a low voice he said, "Whatever that little girl wants, put it on my bill." The waitress smiled, used to Henry's kindness, and nodded. When the plate of food arrived at the girl's table, her eyes widened in surprise. She looked around confused, until the waitress leaned down and whispered that it was taken care of. The girl's face lit up with gratitude, though she didn't know who had done it. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, and when she was finished, she whispered a soft thank you into the air, as if hoping someone would hear. Henry didn't approach her, didn't introduce himself, and didn't expect anything in return. For him, it was enough to know that the child had gone to bed that night with a full stomach. Life went on, and Henry never gave the moment much thought again. He had lived a long, hard life filled with struggles. He had worked odd jobs when he was younger, spent years doing labor to survive, and now in his old age he had very little to show for it. No wife, no children, no family nearby, just a small, run-down apartment and the routine of his quiet days. But he always believed that kindness mattered, even if it was something small, even if no one ever knew. To him, those little acts of goodness gave life meaning. Years passed, and Henry grew older. His hair turned completely gray, his steps slower, his hands more fragile. His days became lonelier, and sometimes he wondered how much longer he would be able to take care of himself. The world moved quickly around him, but Henry remained a small, almost invisible figure in his community. And yet, unknown to him, that single act of kindness he had once offered in a diner had planted a seed that would grow into something extraordinary. One chilly evening, as Henry sat alone in his apartment, there was a knock on his door. He wasn't expecting anyone. Curious and a little cautious, he shuffled to the door and opened it. Standing there was a young woman, neatly dressed, with kind eyes that seemed strangely familiar. She smiled warmly at him and said, "Mr. Henry, you may not remember me, but I remember you." Henry blinked, unsure what to say. The young woman continued, "Many years ago, you paid for a little girl's meal at the diner. That little girl was me." Slowly, the memory returned to Henry. The girl sitting nervously at the table, the way her eyes had lit up when the food arrived. He had almost forgotten, but now, seeing her grown up, it all came back. "You?" he whispered, amazed. "That was you?" She nodded. "Yes, and I never forgot what you did for me." Henry was speechless. He had never imagined that the small gesture would be remembered, let alone bring someone to his door years later. The young woman introduced herself as Emily. She explained that she had grown up in very difficult circumstances. Her family had struggled with poverty, and she often went without meals. That night, at the diner, had been one of the lowest points in her childhood, when she had felt completely alone and hopeless. But the kindness of a stranger had made her feel seen, valued, and cared for. It had inspired her, giving her strength in ways she couldn't explain. "It may have been a small thing to you," she said, her voice filled with emotion, "but to me, it meant the world. It gave me hope." Emily then told Henry something that nearly brought him to tears. She had worked hard, studied relentlessly, and had eventually built a successful career. She had become a doctor, dedicating her life to helping others, just as she had once been helped. And now, standing at his door, she wanted to return the kindness. She had not only tracked him down, but had also come with a surprise. She told Henry that she wanted to make sure he never struggled again. She had arranged for him to move into a comfortable home where he would be cared for, where he wouldn't have to worry about bills or loneliness. "You gave me a meal when I was hungry," she said softly, "and now I want to give you the life you deserve." Henry's eyes filled with tears. He had lived so long believing that his life had been quiet and ordinary, that his struggles had gone unnoticed. But in that moment, he realized that a single act of kindness had created a ripple effect that changed someone else's future. He had touched a life without even knowing it. And now that life had come back to touch his, the old man broke down, overwhelmed with gratitude, as Emily held his hand and assured him that he was not alone anymore. From that day forward, Henry's life changed dramatically. Emily kept her promise. She made sure he had the best care, brought him into her circle of family and friends, and visited him often. For the first time in years, Henry felt truly loved and valued. And he would often say with a smile that he never could have imagined how paying for a little girl's meal could lead to the greatest blessing of his old age. This story is a powerful reminder of the impact that even the smallest gestures of kindness can have. We often underestimate the power of a simple act: buying a meal, offering a smile, showing compassion. But sometimes, those moments plant seeds that grow in ways we may never see. In Henry's case, his quiet act of generosity not only gave a hungry child food, but also gave her hope, which shaped her life and inspired her to help others. And in the end, that same kindness came full circle, bringing comfort and love back to him when he needed it most. It shows us that kindness is never wasted. Even when it feels small or unnoticed, it can ripple through time and lives in ways we cannot imagine. Henry didn't know that his action would change Emily's life, and Emily didn't know that she would one day be in a position to change his. But that is the beauty of kindness: it connects us, carries forward, and returns when we least expect it. So the next time you have a chance to do something kind, no matter how small, remember this story. You never know whose life you might touch, and how that act might one day come back to you in ways you could never predict. And that's the story of Henry, the poor old man who paid for a little girl's meal, and Emily, the little girl who grew up to repay his kindness in the most beautiful way. If this story inspired you, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel for more uplifting stories like this, and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. Have you ever experienced a moment where a small act of kindness made a big difference in your life? Don't forget to share this video as well, because you never know who might need this reminder today.